The assassin stood motionless in the dark alley, hidden in the neon glow of Earth's cityscape. His name was Krelith, and he was the best in his trade, silent, precise, and deadly. He had eliminated over 100 targets across the galaxy, and never once had he failed. His reptilian skin shimmered under his cloaking device, a near-invisible specter waiting for the perfect moment to strike. But this assignment was different. He had been hired to eliminate a single human. Just one. A simple task, or so he thought. Krelith's black eyes locked onto his target, a middle-aged man walking out of a coffee shop, unaware of the deadly presence lurking nearby. His name was David Carter, an ordinary human by all appearances. He wasn't a military officer, a scientist, or even a politician. Just a man in a worn-out jacket, sipping coffee as he strolled down the sidewalk. Why would someone pay a fortune to have him eliminated? It didn't matter. Krelith never questioned his contracts. But something felt wrong. He had assassinated warlords, corrupt diplomats, and hardened criminals, targets who deserved to be erased. Yet this man didn't fit the profile. He was too relaxed, too normal. And that was unsettling. Still, a job was a job. Krelith extended a clawed finger, activating his wrist-mounted weapon. The silent plasma dart was ready. One shot, and the mission would be over. He took aim. And then David stopped. He looked around, as if sensing something. His eyes narrowed, scanning the empty street. There was no way he could see Krelith. The assassin's cloaking technology was generations ahead of anything humans possessed. Yet David smiled. "I know you're there," the man said calmly, taking another sip of his coffee. "And if you know what's good for you, you'll run." Krelith's finger froze over the trigger. His reptilian instincts screamed at him. Something wasn't right. He was the hunter, the unseen predator, but at that moment, as the human met his gaze, Krelith had the chilling realization. He was the one being hunted. Krelith's heart pounded in his chest. Though his alien physiology didn't allow for a heartbeat, the sensation was as close to panic as he had ever known. David Carter, the target he was supposed to eliminate, stood in front of him, looking straight at him. The alien assassin's mind raced, trying to understand what was happening. How had the human sensed him? No human, no matter how skilled or perceptive, should have been able to detect him. He had successfully infiltrated enemy strongholds, evaded entire battalions, and erased individuals without leaving a trace. His reputation as the most efficient assassin in the galaxy was built on his ability to remain unseen, unheard, and untouchable. But now, this man was staring him down, a small, quiet smile curling at the corner of his lips. Krelith's hand twitched toward his weapon, but something held him back. David wasn't panicking. He wasn't afraid. He stood there with the confidence of someone who knew far more than his simple appearance suggested. The more Krelith tried to decipher the situation, the more questions arose. David took another sip of his coffee, his eyes never leaving Krelith's location. The assassin was certain that the human couldn't see him, not with the cloaking technology engaged. But the unsettling fact remained: David acted as if he were aware of his presence. "You're not going to shoot," David said, his voice calm but with an undertone of certainty. "You'll make the right choice." Krelith's mind spun. What right choice? For a moment, everything around him seemed to slow. His acute senses, honed over years of combat, noticed the slightest change in the environment. He could hear the soft rustle of leaves in the distant park, the rhythmic hum of the city's pulse, and yet David's voice, steady and sure, cut through it all like a blade. "I don't know who sent you," David continued, his voice carrying an almost unearthly calm. "But I can tell you're not here to kill me." "Not really." Krelith's claws flexed instinctively, his mind trying to parse the words, the meaning behind them. He had killed many, warriors, criminals, mercenaries, but this human? This man had no fear. He wasn't even fazed by the very real danger he was in. This didn't make sense. David turned his back to Krelith, as though dismissing the assassin entirely. He walked a few steps, then stopped. "I'll tell you this," David said, his voice carrying over his shoulder. "You don't want to make an enemy of humanity." The words sent a chill down Krelith's spine. He wasn't used to being talked to like this, especially not by a target. But before he could process the full weight of David's message, something extraordinary happened. The air around Krelith crackled. His advanced sensors, designed to detect the slightest fluctuation in energy, spiked with an anomaly. He wasn't the only one in the alley anymore. A figure appeared. At first, Krelith thought it was a trick of the light, but no. Another presence had entered the space, a shadow that flickered with a strange energy. The figure stood tall, a human silhouette, though something was off about them. The energy around them felt different, foreign. David didn't turn around. He didn't flinch. The new figure spoke, but the words were distorted, almost as if they were being transmitted through an unknown channel. "Leave now, Krelith. You've been warned." Krelith's eyes narrowed. The name sent a jolt through him. It was a name he hadn't heard in years, a name from the old, forgotten corners of the galaxy. The Watcher. The Watcher was an enigma, a figure that no one, not even Krelith, fully understood. Some claimed they were more than human, a being with knowledge of the cosmos that could rival entire fleets of warriors. The Watcher was a legend, someone whose power was said to transcend time itself. Yet here they were, standing in the alley like an ordinary person, delivering a warning that felt more like a command. Krelith's instincts screamed for him to move, to engage, to strike first before things escalated further. But something inside him, something deeper than logic, held him back. David finally turned around, his eyes locking onto Krelith's. There was no fear, no hesitation. Only a quiet understanding that made the assassin's blood run cold. "Listen to the Watcher," David said softly. "You don't want to make a mistake here. Not with us." For the first time in his career, Krelith hesitated. Krelith's mind raced, struggling to process what had just happened. The Watcher had appeared, and David knew about the Watcher, and, incredibly, didn't seem surprised. But it wasn't just the appearance of the mysterious figure that rattled Krelith. It was the presence of a power he had never encountered in his countless missions across the galaxy, a force that came from something as simple and elusive as humanity itself. Krelith's mission was clear: eliminate the target, leave no evidence, and disappear into the void of space. He had always succeeded. Every time. Yet, standing in front of David, the situation felt wrong. The air hummed with tension. The Watcher stood perfectly still, their figure dark and imposing, though their face remained hidden beneath a hood. The crackling energy surrounding them had intensified. Krelith could almost feel it pressing against him, distant, but all-encompassing. As if the very fabric of reality was bending under the force of their presence. David's voice broke through the oppressive silence. "You should go," he said, his words carrying the weight of experience. "You don't understand the stakes, Krelith." Krelith felt the edge of his weapon against his skin, an old friend who had never failed him before. He could draw it in an instant and end this, but something in his gut told him it wouldn't be that simple. The way David spoke, it wasn't the voice of a man in danger. It was the voice of someone who had faced unimaginable challenges and won. And that unsettled Krelith in ways he couldn't articulate. "You don't know humanity," David continued, his eyes never leaving Krelith. There was something almost gentle in his gaze. "You think we're just fragile, weak beings. But you're wrong. You've never faced anyone like us." Krelith froze, the words cutting through him like a dagger. Fragile, weak? No one had ever called him weak. Krelith had killed without remorse, without hesitation, with the precision of a god. But this human, this man, was making him feel something he hadn't felt in ages: uncertainty. David took a step closer, his movements unhurried, deliberate. Krelith instinctively shifted his weight, his senses flaring, preparing for an attack. But David didn't make a move to defend himself. Instead, he spoke in the calmest tone, as though he were trying to explain something incredibly obvious. "I've faced death before," David said. "I've lost everything. I've been through hell. And here I am. Still standing." Krelith's mind raced to recall any data about David's background, but there was nothing. The man wasn't a general, nor a warrior. He wasn't part of any military organization or covert ops. No records, no alliances. Just an ordinary human, or so it seemed. Yet David's words lingered in the air like a silent warning. Still standing. It was a phrase that held weight far beyond its simple structure. Something in David's voice, something in his eyes, spoke of resilience, an untapped strength that no weapon in Krelith's arsenal could defeat. David continued, his gaze now flickering briefly toward the Watcher. "And I'm not alone in this." The Watcher, who had been silent up until this point, took a small step forward, their presence filling the space. They didn't need to speak. The mere act of moving conveyed a level of power that made the air feel heavy. Every muscle in Krelith's body screamed at him to flee, to abandon this impossible mission. But his pride and training held him firmly in place. "Leave," the Watcher finally spoke, their voice a soft, resonant hum that felt like it came from the very core of the universe itself. "This is not your fight. And if you stay, you will lose." Krelith's hand twitched again, but he stayed still, the weight of the Watcher's words pressing against him. He had never been one to back down, but the warning was undeniable. It wasn't like anything he had encountered in his life. The Watcher wasn't merely a person, they were something far greater, something beyond even the highest of commanders in Krelith's empire. "You don't have to die," David said, his voice cutting through the swirling confusion in Krelith's mind. "No one does. But if you stay, it's your choice." David's words hung in the air like a challenge that struck right at the heart of Krelith's entire existence. A challenge? Was he being tested? Was this some form of psychological warfare? Krelith glanced back at the Watcher, but they were still, their attention focused solely on him. The presence they exuded felt infinite, and yet, strangely comforting. They weren't just telling him to leave, they were offering him an out, a path back from the brink. For the first time, Krelith felt a deep, visceral pull, the pull to live, to survive, to leave and learn from this experience. "Run," David urged again, softer this time, yet more resolute. It wasn't a command. It wasn't a threat. It was an understanding. Krelith stood there, unable to move, the weight of his own history, his reputation, and his mission pressing down on him like a storm. He had spent his entire life running toward death, embracing it, becoming a part of it. But now, he was faced with an entirely different question. Could he run away from it? As the seconds ticked by, his grip on his weapon loosened. The assassin had never known fear, but here, in this moment, he felt it, a fear that came from a place he had never explored before. It wasn't a fear of death. It was a fear of being wrong. "Leave," the Watcher said again, and this time, Krelith heard something in their voice. It wasn't just an order, it was a plea. And for the first time in his life, Krelith listened. Krelith's foot moved, the first hesitant step in a direction he never thought he would take. He felt the ground beneath him shift, almost as if the very earth was offering its own gentle resistance. It wasn't the usual feeling of taking a step toward escape, but something far deeper, a feeling that he was walking away from everything he had ever known. The assassin glanced over his shoulder one last time. David stood where he had been, calm and composed, his eyes never leaving Krelith. The Watcher, too, remained still, an ethereal figure in the background, their power undiminished by Krelitha's decision to leave. Krelitha's heart raced as he continued to move away. Every instinct screamed at him to turn around, to draw his weapon, to finish the mission. But his legs carried him forward, as if guided by an invisible force. He felt the weight of every moment he had spent as a killer, each of his choices leading to this very one. Was this truly the right decision? What was he running from? And more importantly, why was he running? He didn't have the answers. All he knew was that something had changed. The Watcher had been right, he couldn't fight them. He had never seen power like that before, not even in the most advanced civilizations he had encountered. It wasn't just about physical strength or even control over space and time. It was something far more profound, a connection to something beyond comprehension. David's voice echoed in Krelitha's mind as he walked further away. "You've never seen humanity at its full potential, Krelith." The words seemed to linger, almost as though they were etched into the air itself. The assassin's mind raced. The more he thought about it, the more David's words rang true. Krelith had been trained to see only the fragility of human beings, to see them as insignificant and powerless. But now, in the midst of everything, he was being shown a different side of humanity, a side that didn't bow to strength or power, but to something far deeper. Krelith felt something stir inside him, an unfamiliar feeling. It was a sense of wonder, of awe. For all his life, he had believed that destruction was the ultimate expression of power. But now, he was faced with a force of life that was stronger than death. He stopped walking, his feet firmly planted on the ground. It wasn't fear that had stopped him this time, but something else, a pull, an undeniable attraction to this new revelation. He turned slowly, his eyes meeting David's once again. "What is this?" Krelitha's voice was raw, strained. "What is it that makes you so different?" David smiled, though there was no smugness in it, no sense of victory. His smile was one of understanding, of compassion. "It's not about us, Krelith. It's about you." The words hit Krelith like a blow. What did David mean by that? Krelith had always defined himself by his actions. He had measured his worth by the number of lives he had taken, by the assignments he had completed. But David's words shattered that perception, leaving him standing there, unsure of who he even was anymore. "What makes us different," David continued, stepping closer, his voice soft, yet resolute, "is our ability to hold on. To endure. To rise, no matter how many times we fall. That's what makes humanity strong." Krelith took a breath, trying to steady himself. The human in front of him was different. He had seen so many others, warriors, diplomats, emperors, yet none of them had spoken with such conviction. None of them had this resolve. This quiet power. The Watcher, still standing in the distance, said nothing, but their presence filled the air like an all-encompassing shadow, like they were watching, waiting. It wasn't menacing, though. It was more like a guardian, guiding Krelith toward something greater than himself. David's voice broke the silence once more. "You don't have to understand it all right now. But if you want to know what makes us human, truly human, you'll have to walk the path with us." Krelith hesitated. The idea of walking the path with these humans, something so foreign, so fragile, seemed impossible. Yet here he was, at the crossroads of something that could change everything. He looked at David, his eyes searching for any sign of doubt, of weakness. But there was none. Just unwavering certainty. "You've never had to fight for your life, have you?" Krelith asked, his voice quieter now, more introspective. "Not in the way I have." David shook his head. "I've fought in ways you can't even imagine. But it's not the fight that defines us. It's how we keep fighting, even when everything is against us. That's the strength you've been missing, Krelith." The weight of David's words settled on Krelith's shoulders. It wasn't about winning the fight. It was about continuing the fight, about enduring. And for the first time in his life, Krelith felt a deep stirring inside him. Maybe humanity wasn't as weak as he had always believed. Maybe their true power wasn't in their physical strength, but in their ability to overcome. Krelith lowered his weapon, the familiar weight in his hands suddenly feeling insignificant. He took another step toward David, no longer seeing him as a target, but as something far more significant. "I want to understand," Krelith said, his voice steady now. "I want to walk the path with you." David's smile widened, a true, knowing smile this time. "You're on the right path." The Watcher, too, seemed to acknowledge Krelith's decision, their presence flickering briefly as though a weight had been lifted. And so, in that moment, Krelith made the choice that would change his life forever. He wasn't just walking away from his mission anymore. He was stepping into something new, something powerful. Something that only humanity could teach him. Krelith stood still for a moment, the hum of distant city life filtering through his heightened senses. The wind carried a faint scent of food, of warm fires and hurried footsteps as humans moved about their daily lives. He could feel the pulse of the world around him, the rhythmic heartbeat of a species determined to endure no matter what came their way. David, now standing beside him, said nothing for a while. It was as though he was letting Krelith absorb the magnitude of his decision, this pivotal moment where a skilled killer was choosing to leave everything behind and walk with humans, with them. The pressure was almost too much to bear, and yet Krelith felt an unexpected calm. The earth beneath his feet, the sounds of life all around him, everything seemed to be guiding him forward, as though the universe itself approved of his choice. Still, doubts remained. "I don't understand," Krelith muttered, more to himself than to David. "How can you live like this? How do you endure when everything is so fragile?" David smiled, his gaze steady. "It's in the fragility, Krelith. You think our strength comes from our power. But that's not true. Our strength comes from our vulnerabilities. The fact that we can fall, and yet rise again. We live in constant impermanence. But we keep moving. We keep trying." David's words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Krelith had always seen his own people as superior, strong, unyielding, powerful. He had been taught to see humans as weak, to consider them inferior. But now, as he stood with David, as he saw this quiet conviction in his eyes, he couldn't shake the feeling that he had been wrong. His entire existence had been defined by fighting, by strength, by victory at any cost. But this? This was something different. A figure emerged from the shadows, breaking the silence. It was the Watcher, still distant, still omnipotent, and still watching their every move. The Watcher's presence wasn't just noticeable now, it was undeniable. There was an unspoken weight to their being that made Krelith feel as though even the smallest movement could set off a chain reaction of consequences. The Watcher's gaze was unyielding as always, but there was something new this time, something like approval. David turned to Krelith, his expression serious. "This is your test, Krelith. You've chosen to walk with us, but the path you now walk is fraught with trials. It's not easy to change, to let go of everything you've known. The strength you need to grow, to understand what it truly means to be human, it lies within you." Krelith's heart raced. He had come a long way from the assassin he once was, and yet the road ahead seemed impossibly long. What would it mean to truly be human? To experience the suffering, the loss, the beauty? He had spent so much of his life focused on destruction, could he now learn to embrace life? Could he learn to fight not for victory, but for something else? The Watcher spoke then, their voice like a ripple in the fabric of reality. "The trial begins now. And it will test not just your body, but your heart." Krelith braced himself, expecting an immediate challenge, a test of physical prowess, perhaps. But instead, David led him into the heart of a nearby town. People were bustling around, walking with purpose, laughing, talking, living their lives. At first, everything seemed normal, until Krelith noticed something unsettling. There were children nearby, playing in the street. A group of humans was gathering around a small stand, their attention focused on something in the distance. The tension in the air was palpable, but it wasn't until a woman called out for help that Krelith realized the source. "Somebody help." The woman's voice cracked as she struggled to keep her child in her arms. The child was unconscious, her skin pale and clammy. A crowd began to form, but no one moved to help. Fear rippled through the people, they were frozen in place, unsure of what to do. Krelith's instincts kicked in, the assassin inside him rising to the surface. He was trained to deal with situations like this, to take action in moments of crisis. But as he stepped forward, David's hand landed gently on his arm, holding him back. "Wait." David's voice was calm but firm. "This is not your fight." "Not yet." Krelith froze, confused. "But the child?" "Yes," David said quietly. "But this is where you must learn." The crowd continued to watch, paralyzed. The woman's desperation grew with every second that passed. Krelith felt the urge to rush forward, to do something, anything. But instead, he stood still, the internal war between his instincts and David's teachings raging inside him. The woman's cries for help were unbearable, and yet Krelith did not move. His eyes met David's, who simply watched, waiting. Time seemed to stretch, the world around them slowing down. And then, just as Krelith was about to step in, a man from the crowd approached the woman. He wasn't dressed in any special way, just an ordinary person, no title or position. But the look in his eyes was steady, full of purpose. He knelt beside the woman, speaking softly, comforting her. Without hesitation, he gently laid the child down on the ground and began performing CPR. The crowd parted, some people still watching in awe, others too fearful to help. Krelith's eyes flickered between the man and David. The man didn't have any extraordinary powers. He wasn't an expert medic. But he acted. He did what needed to be done, without thinking, without hesitation. It was the simplicity of his actions that struck Krelith to his core. The man wasn't acting for recognition or glory. He was acting out of the most human thing of all, empathy. Krelith watched in stunned silence as the man managed to revive the child, her breath returning in ragged gasps. The crowd erupted into applause, and the woman's cries turned into tears of relief. The man, however, didn't bask in the glory. He simply stood up, patted the child's head, and walked away, leaving the scene without fanfare. David turned to Krelith. "That is humanity, Krelith. Not strength, not power. It's the ability to act when it counts. To fight not for victory, but to protect, to help, to save. This is the true test of strength." Krelith stood there, his heart racing. The lesson was clear, but it was still difficult to fully grasp. His life had been defined by violence, by destruction. But this? This was something entirely different. The strength he had always coveted, the strength he thought he understood, had nothing to do with raw power. It was about something deeper, something far more valuable, the strength to care, to stand up, to do what was right, even when it was hard. As they left the town, Krelith felt a flicker of something new inside him. A spark of understanding. Perhaps this was the path he was meant to walk after all. And perhaps, just perhaps, there was still hope for him to change. The sky was a deep orange as Krelith and David made their way through the outskirts of the city, the echoes of the recent event still hanging in the air. The world around them seemed quieter now, as if holding its breath. Krelith had learned much in such a short time. But as they walked, his mind turned over the lesson he'd witnessed, the man's unflinching selflessness in the face of a crisis. Yet, as Krelith's awareness deepened, so did his understanding of the weight of the choices he was making. There were consequences to everything. You can't just walk away from your past, Krelith muttered, the truth of his words hitting him like a physical blow. David's gaze softened as he glanced over at Krelith, his tone understanding but firm. I never said you could. But you can learn from it. And you can choose a different path. Krelith's hands clenched at his sides. The memories of his past were not so easily erased, and the gravity of his former life weighed on him. Every mission, every kill, was an irreversible part of him. He wasn't sure if he was ready to let it all go. But as they continued their journey, something unexpected happened. The Watcher, the enigmatic figure who had been observing his every move, appeared before them once more. The air seemed to thicken with tension, the Watcher's gaze intense as ever. You've learned the lesson, Krelith, the Watcher's voice was low, reverberating in the space around them. But now comes the final test. You are no longer just an observer. You are part of this world. And you will face the consequences of your actions. Krelith froze. The words hit him like a cold wave. Consequences? The Watcher's form flickered like a shadow before becoming solid once more. Your past is never far behind. You can run from it, hide from it, but it always finds a way back to you. Before Krelith could respond, a sound echoed in the distance. A siren. Then, another. And another. David looked at Krelith, his face somber. You should have known, he said quietly. No one walks away from their past so easily. The city had begun to stir in a different way now. Police were mobilizing. News began to spread. The assassin who had vanished into the shadows was back. And with him, the memories of those he had killed, the blood he had spilled. The weight of his former identity was crashing down on him, pulling him back into a reality he thought he could leave behind. As the sirens grew louder, a crowd began to form ahead of them. Krelith's heart pounded. He knew what this meant. He could already feel the eyes on him, the same cold, calculating gaze that had always followed him as an assassin. The Watcher's words echoed in his mind, reminding him of his inescapable truth. David was quiet, his face set in a grim expression. This is where you have to choose, Krelith. Do you face what you've done, or do you run? Krelith swallowed hard. The easy path, one of violence and escape, was tempting, but it was also the path he had walked for so long. The familiar sense of control, of power, was within reach. But at what cost? The people around him, the same humans he had learned to respect, to care for, would pay the price if he chose that path. Suddenly, the crowd parted, and two uniformed officers approached. One of them was the same man Krelith had seen earlier, the one who had helped save the child. Krelith's stomach twisted. This man, this ordinary human, had now become a part of his reckoning. The officer's voice was calm but firm. You're coming with us, he said. There was no malice in his tone, only resolve. Krelith's mind raced. There was a part of him that wanted to resist, to fight, to destroy whatever threatened his freedom. But David's words echoed in his mind once again. You fight not for victory, but to protect. To help. To save. The Watcher stood silently in the background, watching, waiting. David stepped forward, his voice steady. He's not going anywhere. The officer's gaze flickered between Krelith and David, his jaw tightening. This man is a threat to everything we stand for. David didn't flinch. No. He's not a threat anymore. He's choosing a new path. And that's the one he'll follow. No matter what. Krelith didn't know what to say. The weight of his past was unbearable, pressing down on him like 1,000 tons of stone. But David was standing beside him, offering him a chance to face this moment, this reckoning. It was not the battle Krelith had expected, but perhaps it was the one he needed to fight the most. The officer hesitated, but his eyes betrayed his uncertainty. "This isn't over," he said, before turning and walking away with his partner. David turned to Krelith, his expression unreadable. "It's your move now." Krelith's heart thudded in his chest, a mixture of fear and resolve surging through him. This wasn't a test of strength. It wasn't a battle of power or skill. It was something far more difficult, a test of character. Could he face his past? Could he accept the consequences of the things he had done, and the things he still had to do? Could he choose a new path, one that didn't rely on destruction, one that embraced life and the beauty of second chances? The choice was his. And for the first time in his life, Krelith didn't know if he was strong enough to make it. The sirens faded into the distance, replaced by an eerie stillness that settled over the city. Krelith stood motionless, his mind a whirlwind of doubt and uncertainty. The weight of his past, his violent past, seemed to crush him from all sides. But through it all, he felt something unexpected, a spark of hope. David's words echoed in his ears. "You don't have to run anymore." For the first time in his life, Krelith didn't want to run. Not from the law, not from his past, and not from the consequences of his actions. He wanted to face them. But how could he? What if the world was right to fear him? What if his sins were too great to forgive? "You're stronger than you think," David said quietly, breaking the silence. "And you're not alone in this." Krelith glanced at David. The man who had stood by him through this entire ordeal, through the fear, the danger, and now, the uncertainty, was a symbol of everything he hadn't known he could be. David had chosen to trust him, to believe in him, when no one else would. And now, Krelith knew, he had to choose the same for himself. It was a choice to be better, to seek redemption, to protect rather than destroy. It wasn't easy. It wouldn't be fast. But it was the only path forward. The officer who had approached earlier stood a few paces away, watching them carefully. His expression was unreadable, but Krelith could feel the tension in the air. The man had witnessed Krelith's transformation, but that wasn't enough to make him forget the past. "You're asking for a second chance," the officer said after a long pause. "But the world doesn't forget easily. Your actions, they can't be erased." Krelith nodded slowly. He knew this better than anyone. But the words from the Watcher still lingered in his mind, "Your past doesn't define you. But your choices, your future, that's where your true strength lies." "I don't expect forgiveness," Krelith said, his voice steady. "But I'm asking for a chance to show that I'm more than the sum of my mistakes." There was a long silence. The officer's gaze softened, but only for a moment. "You have to prove that," he said. "To the world. And to yourself." Krelith took a deep breath. The air felt fresher now, lighter somehow, as if the weight of his old life was beginning to lift, little by little. But it wasn't over. This wasn't the end, it was only the beginning. David stepped forward, his hand resting lightly on Krelith's shoulder. "We've got your back," he said, his voice filled with quiet conviction. The officer looked between them once more, and then, after what felt like an eternity, he nodded. "All right. But know this, people will be watching. They'll want to see what you do with this second chance."